I had always been the one who made things work. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because I wanted the title. It was just something that happened gradually. The way a crack in a ceiling starts small, and then one day you look up and wonder how long it's been like that. I was the one who remembered my mother-in-law's medication refills. I was the one who picked up the slack when my husband forgot to call the plumber, the accountant, the school. I was the one who kept the calendar, kept the peace, kept my mouth shut when it wasn't worth the argument. I did it because I loved my family. And because somewhere deep down, I believed that love like that would be returned. I was wrong. My name is Renata, and I'm 34 years old. I teach second grade at an elementary school in Columbus, Ohio. I've been married to my husband for 8 years. We have a daughter who just turned 6, and for most of those 8 years, I thought we were building something real. Something solid. The kind of family that shows up. Turns out, I was the only one doing the showing up. It started last March. I'd been having symptoms for a few months. Fatigue that wouldn't lift no matter how much I slept. Pain in my lower abdomen that came and went like weather. A kind of heaviness I couldn't explain. I kept telling myself it was stress. Teachers are always tired. Moms are always tired. I scheduled an appointment mostly to rule things out. I didn't rule anything out. My OBGYN referred me to a specialist after an ultrasound showed something she didn't like the look of. The specialist ordered more imaging, then a biopsy. The word she used when she called me back was concerning. She said we needed to schedule surgery, a laparoscopic procedure to remove what turned out to be a large endometriotic cyst that had wrapped around my left ovary and was pressing on surrounding tissue. Not cancer, thank God, but not minor either. She was clear about that. This needs to come out, she told me. The longer we wait, the more complicated it gets. The surgery was scheduled for April 11th. A Friday, I told my husband that same evening. We were sitting at the kitchen table after our daughter had gone to bed, and I laid out everything the doctor had said, the procedure, the recovery time, the fact that I'd need help at home for at least 2 weeks. He nodded. He said he understood. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand and told me everything was going to be fine. That was the last time he really looked at me for a while. The problem, the thing that would become the problem, was that his family had planned a trip to Myrtle Beach. A big family vacation. His parents, his sister and her husband, his brother and his fiancée, all renting a house together for 10 days. It had been in the works since the previous fall. Deposits paid. A whole house rented on the ocean, non-refundable. The trip started April 9th, 2 days before my surgery. When I realized the overlap, I didn't panic. I figured it was obviously going to be resolved. My husband would either stay home or fly down after the surgery once I was stable. The trip could continue for everyone else. We'd make it work. I did not understand at the time that making it work was going to mean something very different to the people I thought would help me. I brought it up the following Saturday when his parents were over for dinner. I wasn't dramatic about it. I just mentioned the timeline, surgery on the 11th, recovery period, that I'd need help with our daughter and around the house, that I was a little scared and would really feel better knowing I had support. My mother-in-law, we've always called her by her first name, Suzanne, looked at me with an expression I still think about. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was more like the look you give someone when they've said something mildly inconvenient, and you're waiting for them to realize it themselves. Well, she said, and she picked up her fork, we've had this trip planned for almost a year. My father-in-law nodded. He had the same quality of not meeting my eyes. My husband said nothing. I waited for him to say something. The silence lasted long enough that our daughter came in from the living room to ask for more juice, and by the time I stood up to get it, the topic had simply moved on. Like I'd brought up a mildly bad weather forecast and everyone had decided not to dwell on it. That night, after the dishes were done and his parents had driven home, I stood in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror for a long time. I was trying to figure out if I had said something wrong, if I had framed it badly. If I was being unreasonable, I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. But the thing about being the person who keeps the peace is that you start to question your own reality when the peace costs you everything. I talked to my husband again that night, just the two of us. I was as clear as I knew how to be. I am scared. I need you there. I cannot do this alone. He held my hand. He said he would think about it. He thought about it for 2 days, and then he told me he was going to Myrtle Beach. He said it gently. He said it the way someone delivers news they've already decided isn't their fault. He talked about the money already spent, the family expectations, the fact that his mother had really been looking forward to this, that it was only a cyst after all and not something life-threatening, that I had good doctors, that I'd be fine, that his cousin could check in on me, that he'd have his phone on the whole time. I sat there on the edge of our bed, and I listened to all of it. And then I said, very quietly, I need you with me for surgery and you're choosing a vacation. He said it wasn't a vacation, it was a family commitment. I didn't have the energy to explain why those two things weren't mutually exclusive. There's one person in my husband's family who I have always felt truly seen by, and that's his Uncle Darnell. He's in his late 60s now, retired, lives about 20 minutes from us. He spent 30 years as a middle school principal, and he has the kind of calm that comes from having seen everything, and decided most things aren't worth losing sleep over, except the things that are. He's not loud. He doesn't insert himself. But he listens in a way that most people don't, where you can tell he's actually processing what you're saying instead of just waiting for his turn. Uncle Darnell had been at that Saturday dinner. He'd seen my face when Suzanne picked up her fork. He'd seen my husband say nothing. He called me on a Monday morning, about a week before the surgery. How are you doing? He asked. Just like that. No preamble, no pretending he was calling about something else. I told him I was fine, he said. Renata, how are you actually doing? And I started crying in the parking lot of the grocery store, which I had not done up to that point, not once, because I had been holding it together for the sake of holding it together, and I had been doing such a thorough job that I hadn't let myself understand how scared I was. I was terrified. I had never had surgery. I didn't know what it would feel like to wake up from anesthesia. I didn't know if I would be okay. I was going to be alone in that hospital, and alone when I came home, and alone during the weeks of recovery. And the people who were supposed to love me had looked at the calendar and decided their beach house reservation was a more pressing matter. Uncle Darnell listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he said, I'm going to be there, April 11th. I'll be in that waiting room. I tried to tell him he didn't have to. He talked over me, gently but firmly, the way he does. Your family, he said. That's what family does. The morning of April 11th at 6:15 in the morning. I had arranged for our daughter to stay with a friend from school the night before. A mom I trusted, who had said yes immediately when I explained the situation, who had looked at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing about my husband's family, and had the grace not to say it out loud. Uncle Darnell drove me to Ohio Health Riverside. He walked me in. He sat with me while I changed into the hospital gown, stayed in the room until the nurses came to take me back, and squeezed my hand at the doors. I'll be right here when you wake up, he said. He was. I don't remember a lot of the immediate post-surgery period. The anesthesia had made me nauseous and disoriented. But I remember his voice before I fully came back, just talking quietly, telling me the surgery had gone well, that the doctor had come out and spoken with him, that everything looked good. I remember thinking, in that foggy, half-conscious way, that I was not alone, that someone was there, that it mattered more than I had words for. My husband texted me at 11:43 a.m. It said, hope everything went well. Call when you're up to it. I did not call. The recovery was harder than I'd expected. The first 4 days were the worst. I couldn't drive. I couldn't lift anything heavier than a gallon of milk. Getting up from the couch required planning and effort. My daughter came home on Saturday, and I had to figure out how to be a present mother, while not being able to pick her up, which broke something in me in a way I hadn't anticipated. Uncle Darnell came by every morning for the first week. He brought groceries. He drove my daughter to school on the 2 days I had follow-up appointments. He sat in the waiting room at the surgical center while the doctor checked my incisions. He helped me understand the wound care instructions when my brain was too foggy to retain them the first time. He didn't make a production of it. He just showed up. Meanwhile, the Myrtle Beach updates came through on the family group chat. Photos of the ocean. Photos of everyone at dinner at some seafood place. A video of my husband and his brother on jet skis. I watched all of it from my couch, propped up on pillows, with a heating pad on my abdomen and my daughter asleep against my shoulder. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to say anything. Uncle Darnell, I would later learn, was saying things, in his own quiet way. Not commenting on the group chat, not making scenes. He was watching, and he was remembering, and he was keeping records of things I didn't even know he was keeping records of. They came home on April 19th. My husband walked through the door with a tan and a tote bag of beachwear, and he hugged me and said it was really good to be back and asked if I wanted him to order dinner. His parents came over the following Sunday. Suzanne brought a peach pie, from a bakery. She set it on the counter and said, "We thought of you," which is the kind of sentence that reveals everything about a person if you let yourself hear it correctly. They thought of me, briefly. Enough to buy a pie, not enough to be there. I watched my father-in-law settle into the armchair in my living room and turn on the game, and I stood in the kitchen next to a peach pie I hadn't asked for, and I tried to remember the last time anyone in this family, besides Uncle Darnell, had asked me how I was actually doing. I couldn't remember. I tried to give my husband the benefit of the doubt. I tried for weeks. He was attentive when he was home, helpful in the immediate practical ways, doing laundry, picking up our daughter, making dinner most nights, but he never once sat with me and said, "I should have been there. I'm sorry." He acted as though the surgery had been a mild inconvenience that had passed, like a cold or a rough week at work, and now we were all moving forward together as a family. But something had changed in me. Quietly, the way those things change. I had always assumed that the people who loved you would rise to the moment. I had assumed it without ever testing it, the way you assume the floor will hold when you step on it. The surgery had been the test, and I now had the results. And the results were difficult to unfold and look at directly. I didn't say anything to my husband. Not yet. I didn't know what to say, or how to say it, or what I wanted the outcome to be. I was still in the middle of processing all of it. The fear, the recovery, the loneliness, the slow grinding realization that the family I had married into did not see me the way I had believed they did. Uncle Darnell called me one afternoon in late May, while I was grading papers at the kitchen table. My daughter was at school. The house was quiet. "There's going to be a family dinner next Saturday," he said. "Your in-laws' anniversary. 35 years. I knew about it. It had been on the calendar for months. "I'll be there," I said. He paused. "I think there are some things that need to be said at that dinner, Uncle Darnell." "Not by you," he said. "By me." I didn't know exactly what he was planning. He didn't tell me, and I didn't ask because I think some part of me understood that I didn't need to manage this one. Some part of me had finally learned, after 34 years, that it was okay to let someone else carry something for a while. The dinner was at a restaurant my father-in-law loved, an Italian place in Upper Arlington, the kind with white tablecloths and candles and wine bottles, and a breadbasket that they refill without being asked. There were about 20 people there, all of my husband's family, his parents at the head of the table, the whole Myrtle Beach group. Uncle Darnell arrived a few minutes after I did. He sat next to me. He ordered the salmon. He made small talk and laughed at the right moments and gave no indication that the evening was going to go any way other than normally. After the main course, when the desserts were being distributed and the noise level had dropped to the pleasant, settled hum of a family dinner winding down, my father-in-law stood up and made a small toast. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about 35 years of marriage, about what family meant to him, about being grateful for the people around the table. It was a nice toast. Then Uncle Darnell stood up. He stood up slowly, the way he does everything, unhurriedly, with intention. He had his phone in his hand. He looked around the table, and the table went a little quiet, because Uncle Darnell is not someone who usually makes speeches, and when he does, people pay attention. "I also want to say something," he said, "about family." He looked at my in-laws first, then at my husband, then, just briefly, at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I can only describe as old-fashioned love, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. "I want to talk about what happened on April 11th, he said. The table shifted. My husband put down his fork. "Renata had surgery that day," Uncle Darnell said. "She was alone going into that hospital. She was scared, and she needed her family, and I want to make sure the people at this table understand what happened and what didn't happen." Suzanne said, "Darnell, we really don't need to. I want to show you something," he said. And he held up his phone. He had screenshots. He had them organized by date. He started with the family group chat, photos from Myrtle Beach posted while I was in surgery. The jet ski video went up at 12:03 p.m. That was 20 minutes after my husband had sent me the hope everything went well text. My husband had put his phone down after texting me and gotten on a jet ski. Uncle Darnell didn't editorialize. He just read the timestamps. He had my husband's text to him, because Uncle Darnell had been the one updating him in real time, had texted my husband when I went into surgery and when I came out, and my husband had responded with "Okay, thanks and good to hear," and that was the extent of it. He had his own notes. The teas he'd come over, the grocery receipts, the mileage on his car from driving me to follow-up appointments. He had done the math. 14 separate visits in 3 chapeaux, over 200 miles of driving. He had a text from Suzanne, sent 11 days after the surgery, which said, "I'm sending a pie with my husband on Sunday. Hopefully that'll cheer her up." He read that one twice. The table was completely silent. My father-in-law opened his mouth and then closed it. My husband was looking at the tablecloth. My sister-in-law looked at her husband. The brother with the fiancée had turned slightly red. The reason I'm saying this, Uncle Darnell said, and his voice was still calm, still unhurried, is not to ruin a celebration. It's because your family, he looked at my in-laws, does not function the way you believe it does. You think you show up for each other. I have been watching for 8 years, and I need someone at this table to say it clearly. Renata is part of this family, and she was treated like she was not. He sat back down. He picked up his fork and finished his salmon. The dinner did not immediately explode. That's not how these things work usually. What happened was a strange, taut quiet that stretched for a minute or two, during which the server came by with coffee and somehow no one spoke. Then my father-in-law said something to my mother-in-law in a low voice. Then Suzanne said, "I think we were all doing the best we could." And Uncle Darnell, without looking up from his plate, said, "Then we should all do better." My husband didn't speak to me in the car on the way home. Not in anger, more in the way of someone who had just had something rearranged inside them and needed time to find where everything had settled. He came to me later that night, sat on the edge of the bed, and he said, "Finally, after everything, I should have been there. I knew it then, and I didn't do anything about it, and I'm sorry." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in months. I didn't throw my arms around him. I didn't forgive him on the spot. What I said was, "Thank you for saying that. We have a lot to talk about." And we do. We've been in couples counseling since June. It's hard and it's slow, and I don't know yet where it goes from here. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're actually in the same conversation instead of parallel ones. Suzanne came to our house 2 weeks after the dinner. She sat at my kitchen table, and she was uncomfortable and a little stiff, the way people are when they're apologizing, but aren't fully sure they were wrong. She said she was sorry I had felt unsupported. I noticed she didn't say she was sorry for how things had gone. There's a difference, and I noticed it. But I said thank you, because I'm not in the business of making things harder than they need to be. The relationships aren't repaired. Not fully, maybe not ever, in the way they might have been. But I think that's okay. I think some truths, once they've been said out loud in a restaurant with white tablecloths and a bread basket, can't be unsaid. And maybe that's not the worst thing. What I think about most, now, when I think about all of it, is Uncle Darnell in that hospital waiting room. I think about his voice coming through the fog of anesthesia, steady and calm, telling me the surgery went well, that he was right there. I think about 14 visits, 200 miles, a salmon dinner and a phone full of screenshots he carried without my knowing, because he had decided that someone needed to be a witness to what was happening. I didn't ask him to do any of it, he just did it, because that's what he understood family to mean. I called him the week after the anniversary dinner, just to say thank you. He told me I didn't need to thank him. You would have done the same for me, and the thing is, he's right. I would have. I've always been the one who shows up. I just didn't realize until he showed me that I deserved to be shown up for too.